has been an awakening. Have you felt it?
Open your eyes.
Take a moment to open your eyes.
Open your eyes.
The look of a man who accepts what he sees because he is expecting to wake up.
Open your eyes.
You're listening to Apostate Awake, the podcast, available on iTunes, Stitcher, and YouTube. I'm your host, Mr. Watchtower. You can follow me at Apostate Awake. And if you enjoy what you're listening to, you can become a patron of the show by visiting patreon.com/Apostate Awake and give as little as $1 per episode. This is episode 2. So I'm here with co-host Bonaventure. Hey, Bonaventure.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Oh, I'm peachy keen, jelly bean.
Are you excited that it's episode number 2?
Couldn't be more excited if I tried.
Wow, disingenuous. So we've got our first guest.
We do?
Yes.
Is it Jesus?
It's not.
Oh, Mary Magdalene.
I knew that was going to be the next one. No. Jehovah.
Is it Jehovah? Oh, man.
There's no proof physically.
Moroni.
I am Moroni. The
You never
All-American.
said no?
It's not.
Oh.
No.
All right, well, I'm out. That's
Joseph
legal.
Smith.
Joseph Smith. You're not for me.
First guest is he goes by the name Lloyd Evans. Lloyd Evans is his actual real life name. Lloyd. But on YouTube he has his name is, what is it? What's his name?
JW.
No. On YouTube, he's called John Saders, and I presume that was his kind of stage name before he came out as a more out kind of apostate, just so there was less people searching for his actual real life name. I think, I don't know that for a fact. I wish I'd have asked him this when we actually had the interview. I'll ask him via Twitter, I think, and find out. But yes, Lloyd Evans. John Saders, and he is he runs the jwsurvey.org, which is a website where you can go if you are a Jehovah's Witness or like either current Jehovah's Witness or a former Jehovah's Witness, and you can take surveys, and he kind of just like collates the information and finds out what the goings on is, or rather what Jehovah's Witnesses, former and current Jehovah's Witnesses, what the problems are with some of the policies and things like that. So feel free to go over to jwsurvey.org. Okay. And without further ado, Without further ado. Is like goodbye now. Adieu. Without further ado, here's Lloyd Evans.
Fantastic.
Okay, so first thing first, welcome to Apostate Awake, episode 2.
It's an absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you, and thank you for that amazing applause.
You're welcome. You're actually you're the first ever guest. I used to do Watchtower and Awakening podcast, and I've changed it to Apostate Awake for various reasons, which I went through in the first episode. So you have the pleasure of being the very first guest. Are you happy about that?
It's an immense honour, and I will be adding it to my CV once this is finished. So.
I've been looking forward to it actually, because for a number of reasons. The first reason really is because I've been following you on YouTube, and I've visited JW.org and filled out the odd survey here and there as well. So I wanted to speak to you just because of that, but mostly because you're actually the only former Jehovah's Witness
in the world.
You're the only former Jehovah's Witness that I've actually spoken to who is sort of actively speaking about the issues. I've spoken to some former Jehovah's Witnesses who have just kind of like left for reasons they weren't too sure of, but I've never actually spoke to somebody like yourself.
You mean who's left because he's dissatisfied with what he's seeing and what he's learned about the organisation? Yeah,
I've spoke to a few people that have been dissatisfied with the organisation, but not really looked into it enough to articulate exactly why.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of people like that.
Yeah, and the only person that's in my life really is my sister, and she was shunned, but that was about 15, 16 years ago, maybe even longer than that. So the only conversation, bearing in mind like that, you know, the scars that this kind of thing can sometimes leave. I only spoke to her about this like a year ago, and it's 16, 17 years maybe since she actually was shunned. And the only conversation we had was basically, you know, me asking her, does she still believe in anything? Does she believe in a God? And she sort of like, you know, she vaguely believes in there's something out there, but she doesn't really have anything to say about her dissatisfaction with the organisation. So what about yourself?
Well, I think that there is a very broad spectrum of people who leave the witnesses. There are, I think, a huge majority who they're either disfellowshipped or they leave when they're young, and they, for whatever reason, they just don't quite go to that stage where they're willing to be critical of it. And I think there's a number of reasons for that. I think there's a lot to be said for the mind control that Watchtower instills on people, especially when it's mind control that's being thrust on them when they're children. And I think that has a huge effect on people. And I have people on my Facebook friends list, not my John Cedars Facebook, but my private Facebook, where I still have some old friends. And I've got people who I know have left the organisation, who I know are disfellowships, and who probably know that I'm an activist, but they just will not talk to me about it. So I think there is this, there's so many different layers of being an ex-Jehovah's Witness. I get emails from people who say that they've been disfellowshipped for years and years and years, and only after watching a few videos or reading a few articles have they figured out exactly, you know, how they've been lied to. So it's such a complicated issue, mind control.
Yeah, I have a few people that are willing to come on the show. There's a secular lad, Harley, secular lad. You've probably seen him,
right?
And there's also Lydia Finch as well. And the reason I wanted different people like this is because I have my own. What do you call it? My own experience is very different than everybody else's, and I've started to realise that it isn't all the same. I assume that everyone was just kind of in a similar boat, but there's people like Harley that are still living with their parents who are still Jehovah's Witnesses, sort of, you know, my house, my rules kind of thing. Yeah. There's people like me that I never actually got baptised. I was just at the age, I was like just about to turn 16. Yeah,
I heard that. Yeah, there's so many different scenarios, and your situation, I think, is quite a common one. Or you probably think it's less common when you're in that situation, but I think there are so many people who are brought up as witnesses and who just figure out as teenagers that for whatever reason it isn't for them. And yeah, I'm sure there are loads in that situation who just aren't too familiar with the whole activism side.
Yeah, when I left, it was purely selfish. It was just well, maybe not purely selfish, but it was selfish reasoning. It was I had a girlfriend who wasn't in the truth, capital T. So I was sort of like, you know, hiding this girlfriend from everybody that I knew, including my family.
You mean like under the bed?
Physically hide her. No, yeah. to be fair, and she didn't.
Was it a human
never,
trafficking scenario?
it felt similar to it. It felt like I was doing something as illegal as that at the time. But yeah, you know, I wanted to go out with who I wanted to go out with. I didn't really want to give up all of my spare time to go to the meetings and field service. It was getting increasingly embarrassing going out on field service. Knocking on people's doors and stuff, you know, bumping into people that I went to school with. But also, while I was doing all these things, I was obviously asked a lot of questions while I was at school. And I never really had good enough reasons for anything that I was asked. A lot of it was just general sort of, you know, ignorant comments and things. But a lot of it was when there was genuine questions being asked, I had no idea. So as I drifted away, this is why I'm still fully involved with the rest of my family, because I'm just viewed as like a lost sheep that just kind of lost his way, and he might eventually realise the error of his ways and come back to the truth. Yeah,
I'm completely different. I mean, I was listening to your last episode where you were kind of introducing me, and you were saying, you know, he was an elder and he was really involved in it. And I was thinking, was I? You know, because it's almost like another life when you look back and you're trying to remember what you were like as a Jehovah's Witness. And I was trying to think about how seriously I took it. And then I remembered a few conversations I had with my sister. My sister's still, Well, she's a Jehovah's Witness, but I believe she stopped attending meetings. But she and I don't talk to each other. She's basically shunning me. But I can remember a conversation I had with her when I was a believing witness, and I can remember saying to her, Armageddon is coming. It's really coming really soon. I'm telling you that. And I'm thinking back and thinking, gosh, did I really say that? But I did. I really did believe it.
Yeah. I remember being at primary school and sort of asking my mum repeatedly, like how long until Armageddon actually comes, and it wasn't. There was no arrogance behind it. It was just like a childish kind of view of the world, and I think really she just wanted to shut me up. So she was just like, "Yeah, it could be in the next few years," and I was like, "Right, okay." So when I went to school, I remember telling people at primary school that it's not really going to matter because they'll all be dead in a few years, and I'll be like living with lions and pandas and stuff.
Did that make you really popular?
Yeah. Well, to be fair, I don't think kids they didn't really take it on board. I don't think they actually took any of it seriously because it was difficult for me to even conceptualize what these ideas were.
You'd think they'd be really keen on the idea of being obliterated by fireballs in the imminent future, wouldn't you?
Yeah, but I guess to them it's just the same as any cartoon that they may have watched that morning.
Yeah.
It's not as strange, which is that's kind of the reason why religions like to catch you while you're young, because you sort of before you've developed those reasoning faculties.
Well, you're programmed as a child to believe what your parents tell you, and it's in your interests to believe what they tell you, because usually what they tell you is for your own good. So
yeah, so I guess the easiest place we can go to for like the first real question is what made you begin to doubt? Do you remember, was there like a turning point? Was there a particular thing or something that somebody said to you or anything?
Well, I had doubts for a lot of years, but they were very well suppressed. So, for example, I just told you that story about me telling my sister, look, Armageddon's coming. And I can remember saying that to my sister, even though I had suppressed doubts. But I first started having doubts when I was 19, 20, because at the 1999 district convention, and I believe you and I will have gone to the same conventions, which is the ones at Manchester at the MEN Arena.
Yeah, I went to quite a few.
Yeah. And one of I actually write about all this in my book because it was quite a transformative experience for me, but the 1999 district convention was the first convention where I was kind of given some kind of responsibilities, because I was 19. Actually, was I 19 or 20? I think I would have been 20, just turned 20. Sorry, 19. And I was asked to be on the runners team. So I was asked to be on the team of young lads who would take the speakers to the platform, which I thought was this immense privilege, and it was actually drilled into us what a huge privilege it was. And I can remember that convention was when they released the Daniel book, and this was like a really exciting moment for me, because prior to the Daniel book, we pretty much just had the Revelation Climax book, which, people I think deep down thought of as being just complete bonkers, just, demonstrably ludicrous, but they kind of felt like they had to accept it. But the Daniel book just seemed like it was a little bit more sensible, a little bit more written for my generation. So I took it home and I studied it from cover to cover, and I thought, I really want to be on top of this, and when they're talking about this at the Kingdom Hall, I want to know what it's saying. I want to swat up on it. And the further I got through it, the more I realised, no, actually, this is nonsense too. And I started doing something very strange, which was I folded the page if there was something I didn't agree with, because I was terrified of writing it down. I didn't want there to be any evidence that I had actually disagreed with something that Watchtower had said. So my way of telling myself that I disagreed with it was to just fold the page. And so maybe 4 or 5 pages in the book were folded. And to cut a long story short, that set me off asking questions about other things as well. And I kind of had a brief flirtation with apostasy when I was 20. But then when I was 21, my mother died of cancer. And that had the effect of like a bungee cord just dragging me right back into the organisation, because, of course, when you're a Jehovah's Witness and someone who you love very much dies, you're told well, they're not quite dead. They're still alive in Jehovah's memory. And the way for you to see them again is to be as close to the organisation as possible. So from that point forward, I took it deadly seriously. I wanted to do everything I could to be at the very epicentre of the organisation. I ended up going to MTS when I was 25. 2 or 3 years later, I was appointed an elder. And so I really, really did take it seriously. But then when I was 29, my wife and I moved to Croatia shortly after I stood down as an elder. And once I was in Croatia and I was disconnected from the regular kind of indoctrination sessions at the Kingdom Hall, because of course I was going to the meetings, but I couldn't understand a word of what was being said. I started to ask myself, hang on, what do I really believe? Never mind what they're kind of saying. What do I really believe? And then all of these doubts from when I was a 20-year-old came flooding back to me. And I actually realised that if I really thought about it, I could add to the list. So that's where it went for me. And it wasn't long before I was on JW Facts and reading Crisis of Conscience.
And I think a lot of people that will probably listen to conversations like this will either be people that have been in a very similar situation, or there'll be people that just have never really been able to access what Jehovah's Witnesses' lives are all about, because they've had their own particular version of Christianity or Islam or whatever. And I think it's important for people to realise, which is something that I said when I was on the You Without God podcast. It's hard for people to realise just how encapsulated into it you can be while still seeming as though you're sort of part of regular society as well.
Yeah.
You know the whole you're supposed to be in the world but not of the world. And you can see how if somebody close to you dies like that, you'd need a support network, and the support network is there, which is, that's good for people coping. But every time it gets to the stage where if ever I've been to a funeral and it's been in a church or a Kingdom Hall or whatever, the sort of the existential questions come up, and instead of it sort of drawing me towards it, which if I was in your situation, maybe I would have done, but instead of me being drawn towards it, I've sort of seen it and thought, nothing could prove to me more that this kind of thing is to cope with the lack of knowledge and the desperation that people feel.
Yeah, well, basically that's what religion is. Religion is at its very core is an attempt at dealing with mortality. It's people saying, I don't like the idea of dying. I want there to be more. I want to be able to cheat my own death. And religious people can say, oh no, that's not what it's about. But at the essence, when you you can tell from the way they interact with people and the way they try and reason with you, the whole idea of being saved is an attempt to stop someone from dying, or an attempt to allow them to live after they've died. So it is all about death. But with Jehovah's Witnesses, it's not just a case of, the person, your loved one will live on in God's memory. It's a case of your loved one will live on in God's memory, and your only chance of seeing them is to follow to the letter the commands of this group of men in New York. That's the difference I feel with high control cults, is that it's not just the wish thinking, it's the wish thinking plus the kind of fatalistic black and white kind of reasoning.
Yeah, I've separated this out a few times. Or the clearest distinction that I can see between a religion and a cult is that I have this conversation with one of my co-hosts, Norris, who is a former Catholic, and I was explaining to him that he can be a Catholic just like many other people are Catholics, but they can be Catholics and pretty much do anything they want. They can be murderers, Catholics. They can go to church and be a Catholic, or not go to church and be a Catholic. You can be part of the religion just by simple association. And somewhere like the Catholic Church will be happy for you to have that association because they want the numbers. Whereas like a cult is kind of like our way or the highway, and that is very much how the Jehovah's Witness sort of organisation works. And I obviously I know this from my sister being shunned. She left to go to another country. It's too much, but it's either you do what we say or there's nothing in store for you, and not only nothing in store for you, like in the hereafter, like you lose your life after death, because a lot of people are shunned while still believing it as well. That's one of the devastating issues, where if you actually believe that if you believe that kind of stuff is going to happen after death, and then you are shunned, how do you reconcile this when you've been shunned away from your family and your friends? Sometimes that is the only support network that people have, and I think it's devastating and harmful. And people in the organisation and in the congregations don't really think about that too much, because they just kind of washed it away. That kind of religious sort of glazed expression. It's just that kind of like, right, let's just stop thinking about it. That's it.
I actually would suggest, or would guess, if I had to kind of bet on the matter, I would think that most disfellowshipped Jehovah's Witnesses still believe it at some level, because that's, after all, how you have so many people going back and getting reinstated. And it's the only way I can explain, as I said before, the emails I get where people say, well, I've been disfellowshipped for X amount of years and only now have I woken up. So every now and then people will say to me, oh, what's the point of activism? How can you possibly expect to wake up Jehovah's Witnesses? And my reply to them is, well, do you really think I'm just doing this for Jehovah's Witnesses? For Jehovah's Witnesses, because there's a lot of ex-Jehovah's Witnesses. There's a lot of disfellowshipped people who still believe the indoctrination because it's so potent. And the only way you can reach out to them is by giving them the opportunity to find resources online.
Yeah, that brings me to two things. One is that the reason why the podcast is called Apostate Awake is because I am an apostate, and awake is, it's the play on words from one of the Jehovah's Witness magazines, The Watchtower and Awake, but also because of the awakening process, that it was a gentle waking up for me. when I was young and I left, again, it was selfish reasons, but then I probably didn't look at anything particularly religious for 3 or 4 years without any no sort of great soul searching experience or anything. I was just living my life as a teenager, getting on with it, going on holiday, getting a job, things like that. And it wasn't until I was going on holiday. I was about maybe 19, 20, something like that. I was going on holiday, and I had a book and some magazines. Not a Jehovah's Witness literature, just like just random books and magazines. And I realised that I was gradually sort of looking more and more into into popular science and things like that. So the very first thing that I came across, when I started to think to myself, I can't really turn my back on the things that my mum and dad brought me up to believe unless I have a reason to do that. So I kind of started with Genesis, and I couldn't really leave Genesis for
We're
like
talking
a year
about
or so.
the Bible book and not the band, aren't we?
Yes.
Right, okay.
Although Genesis was a big part of my upbringing as well.
You didn't suddenly develop a craving for Phil Collins.
Yeah, I'll always have a craving for Phil Collins. My sister's quite a bit older than me, so she played a lot of Phil Collins.
Oh, right.
She refers to him only as Filky Babes. For some reason.
Fair enough.
But yeah, but Genesis, the Bible book.
Right.
It was the first time I ever looked into evolution. So like right from the offset, that was me done for like a year. I was just reading things about evolution because I thought, well, got to figure out what mum and dad think is correct and true. And when you realise that they are sort of, believing in Noah's Ark and things like that, it just gets a bit surreal when you have a conversation with them without trying to be insulting towards them.
Yeah, well, we have it almost every day because my wife's parents, we actually live in the same house as them, and they are Jehovah's Witnesses.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
It's a kind of quite a delicate situation because when I left the organisation, I went to my judicial committee purely for the purpose of trying to leverage some kind of deal with my elders so that they wouldn't coerce my in-laws to shun me, and that kind of worked. At the moment we have this kind of standoff where we have regular day-to-day interaction because they kind of argue that because we're under the same roof, it's okay to talk to me, but they refuse to eat at the same table. So we haven't had a meal together since the time I was an inactive witness.
Wow.
So, yeah, but my wife has kind of day-to-day kind of discussions with them, and every now and then they'll try and kind of say something to kind of pull at the heartstrings. And like you say, when you're thinking about the absolute nonsense that we were raised to believe that we were taught to think of it as actual facts. We were taught to believe that Noah really did cram every single land-dwelling, animal into this wooden structure that survived a complete inundation, not just of most of the civilized world, but that actually covered the highest peaks on the planet, which would require more water molecules than there are on the planet. It's just absolutely phenomenal. It's like I say before, it's like a bad dream to look back on it and think, wow, I really believed that.
Yeah. The Noah's Ark thing was a sticker for me because, like I said, because I left when I was quite young. My whole upbringing was just thinking about I was into animals and stuff. I was thinking this whole Noah's Ark thing, that's an interesting story. I'm enjoying the fact that I'll be able to sort of live in a paradise on Earth where I can just be around very dangerous animals that aren't going to think about eating me, and those things that I sort of came back to in my adult life. I was just like, wow, this is amazing.
But that's another thing though, isn't it? Because you look back at that kind of utopia that was put on the table for you, and you think, well, no, that was a dystopia, because you have to spend every day praising a deity that has committed the greatest crime in the universe. Every single day you have to praise the God that has wiped out billions of men, women and children, and has asked you to help conceal the evidence so that all of the corpses are buried under the lawn. That, for me, isn't a paradise. That's a dystopia.
Yeah, and it's strangely reminiscent of going back to Noah. It's strangely reminiscent of that flood. Because,
yeah, exactly.
When I've spoke about this in a previous podcast, where if you actually think about the flood happening, but not in like a sort of storybook kind of way, but if you think that if you were actually there, like watching this ark raise in the water, and you were one of the ones that were going to die. If you look around, just take a look at your surroundings and really try and put yourself there and think, if God is doing this, he's killing everybody on the earth apart from a very select few, presumably innocents. And some people say, yeah, but if you didn't listen to Noah and you didn't listen to God, you were no longer innocent. But what about like the newborn babies and things like that? It's mass genocide that would make like the biggest the biggest ethnic cleanser. It would make them blush.
Well, that's one of the great ironies of being an atheist, is that you're often confronted by creationists who will say, oh, well, if only you read the Bible. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Just because you've left the witnesses doesn't mean you have to leave God. If you'd only read the Bible, it would fix everything. And, my answer is, it's because I've read the Bible that I'm an atheist. When you actually think these things through to their fullest extent, like, for example, the Exodus. I mean, there's that recent film. Was it Ridley Scott did a film on Exodus, Gods and Kings?
Gods and Kings, yeah.
And there's that moment in the film where all of the...
you completely cut out then.
Sorry.
The Exodus, Gods and Kings.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
There's that moment where all of the firstborn are killed, and you have that confrontation between Moses and Pharaoh, and there's this look of absolute disgust and anger on all of the Egyptians' faces. How could your God have killed all our kids? What have they possibly done to merit being slaughtered in that way? And when you think about it, it's the most grotesque form of quote-unquote justice you can think of. But then they get to the Red Sea, and obviously when you actually look into Bible archaeology from an objective point of view, you realise that there isn't a shred of evidence for anything that's talked about in Exodus actually happening. But even if we say to creationists, okay, let's say it did happen. So you have this situation where all of the Israelites were at the shores of the Red Sea, and the Red Sea parted, and they were allowed to go through. If you were an adult making that crossing, the likelihood is you were going to your death in the desert, because only Caleb, Joshua, and a few Levites survived the trek across the wilderness, the 40-year trek across the wilderness. So the idea is that the kids survived, but the adults didn't. So if you were an adult, you were going to your death. And if you were a kid, your parents were going to their deaths. And it's that sort of thing that creationists just don't want to think about. But when you sit down and think about it, you think, gosh, I'm glad none of this was true, because it's a really miserable thing to think about. And to suggest that the God who's doing this is loving and just and kind.
Yeah, there's if you sort of if you rewind the story a little as well and go back to the Pharaoh, something that's come up quite a few times in other podcasts that I've been listening to is it's a really important distinction where people will explain that God gives you free will, and that's why you're allowed to do what you want, and that's how you can go against him, and that's why he doesn't reveal himself to everybody, because then there would be no free will because you'd know that he was around. But it clearly states in the scriptures that that God hardened the Pharaoh's heart, preventing him from having the free will to allow things to be.
So God made him a bastard.
Yeah, God made him a bastard.
Well, that makes sense.
Exactly. So it's kind of like, God set up this grand plan.
Yeah.
And he could have planned it a million different ways that were less destructive to human civilization.
Yeah.
But instead, he wants it that way. He wants like the Pharaoh's thinking, oh, maybe I've made a bad mistake here, and then Jehovah just says, oh, come on, Pharaoh, we're doing this, and he's like, yeah, all right, we're doing this.
The whole thing just gets so much easier to swallow once you realise it's just a myth, and then it all makes sense. Yeah.
But it freaks me out because in my eyes, I'm thinking if the God of the Bible is true, there could be no mistakes with the Bible, which is why I'm more of just like an atheist. I'm more of like I'm a very positive atheist, as in like I'm an anti-theist as far as the Bible's concerned, because I think you can't say that there are no gods, but I think you can conclusively say the particular God of the Bible, there's not a chance he exists, because he can't be knowledgeable, and he can't be all powerful, and he can't be omnipresent. I mean, the guy has regrets, for crying out loud. You can't know all things, past, present, and future, and have regrets. That just doesn't happen.
It's impossible to be definitive and say that deism isn't true, because we'll never be able to prove it. But with theism, it's self-contradictory, so we can say it isn't true. Or if it is true, the universe is an extremely messed up place.
Yeah. Right. Let's we'll just change tact a little bit. I'm just curious, because the things that we just spoke about really are sort of they're biblical, so that sort of applies to all.
Let's get back to Jehovah's Witnesses.
Let's get back to Jehovah's Witnesses. Well, I'm just thinking with regards to the website, and I know you get a lot of. Oh, actually, no. Just let me rewind. You explained a little while ago about how you're living in the same house as your wife's parents, your in-laws. Yeah. When you explained about trying to broker that deal, that was actually quite a long vlog post, wasn't it? I remember watching that a while ago. Yeah. And I'd recommend anybody listening to go to your channel and have a look at that, because it's quite it's quite heart-wrenching, really, when you watch it. And if you've been a part of that scenario in any way, shape, or form, watching you talking, I think you sat in a car, aren't you, if I remember rightly, watching that, especially because you're in the car as well, because I have a memory of when I first told my mum that I wasn't going to be coming back, and then I had to sort of walk out of the Kingdom Hall quickly, jump in the car where my sister was, who had been shunned, because my sister was driving, and I had to sit there and just wait, and it seemed like an eternity for my mum to get into the car, and it was just like that wait in the car after having told her those things. Like watching you say those things brought me back to that place, and I just felt sick watching it. It's a bit of a weird. It's a weird thing that can still keep a hold of you, even though it's been years. Things like I regularly give blood, and the first time I went to go and give blood, my heart was in my mouth. I was like looking around the corners, thinking that. Well,
if you're at the hospital, then you need to get that seen to. Quite seriously, yeah. You're in the right place. Yeah. But no, yeah, it's amazing how the emotions take over, and even though you're doing the right thing, it's still you're still conflicted. You're still having all these thoughts racing through your head. And when I went to the Kingdom Hall for my judicial committee, literally half an hour before I was due to, I think it was either when I was getting in the car or half an hour before I left, I can't remember now, but I had an email from my dad saying, that basically said, if you go through with this, I'm going to shun you. I actually repeat the email on the video, and he's stayed true to his word since then. So I have a daughter now who's 2 years old, and she's never met her granddad. Wow. But yeah, even though I knew I was doing the right thing, and to this day I have no regrets, it was still an extremely traumatic experience. I liken it to the way the analogy I use is that, when women give birth, it's extremely painful, but the end product is much better than what they had to begin with. And that's how I feel about disassociating. It was an extremely painful process, and I flinched just thinking about not just my dad sending that email, but also the kind of blowback that we had. It was like a nuclear shockwave from friends and family, slowly finding out one by one and giving us a piece of their minds. And it was a very, very stressful experience. But looking back on it now, my only regret is that I didn't do it sooner. It was absolutely the right decision.
Yeah, no regrets.
If you like, I can sing the Robbie Williams song "No Regrets" at this point.
Yeah, actually, that brings me to a listener's question.
Okay, sure.
I believe actually it's an editor from JW Survey.
JW Survey, yes, one of my colleagues, one of my esteemed colleagues.
It's at Colvert Fade. He wanted me to ask the question: who taught you to sing, and how do we sue them? Just going off on a tangent.
I think what he means is that when you listen to me sing, it's an extremely emotional process, and people find it extremely moving to listen to me singing. I've even heard of people they're so emotional they vomit. So I think that's what he means, is that my singing is so beautiful that he finds it quite traumatic. So that's all I can assume he means.
And when he says who taught you, you can't teach that, can you?
It's something you're born with, and I was lucky to be born with this gift. So
not God given though.
Well, you would if there is evidence for God, it has to be my singing, but it's not quite strong enough evidence.
While we're on listeners' questions, I'll just go to at Secular Lad, which is Harley, who's going to be on one of the upcoming podcasts.
Yeah.
He said he was only being mean by saying that he wanted you to explain in detail how Jehovah's Witnesses came up with the date 1914.
Yeah.
But in a simplistic fashion, because it'll be a bit too much. But in a simplistic fashion, why do Jehovah's Witnesses regard 1914 as the beginning of the end?
The easiest way I can answer that question is to say, go on YouTube, type in John Cedars 1914 607 BCE, and I recently did a video explaining the whole thing. But to cut a long story short, in the early 19th century, a man called John Aquilus Brown decided that there was some relevance to Nebuchadnezzar's dream in Daniel chapter 4, and assigned a period of 2,520 years for Gentile times between when the last king in Judah would be ruling and when Christ would return to establish theocratic rule. And that period of 2,520 years was borrowed by a succession of crackpot 19th century writers, one of whom was Charles Taze Russell. And a variety of dates were arrived at. And with one of those dates, Charles Taze Russell hit the jackpot, because he decided to make the end date of that 2,520-year period 1914. And just by happy coincidence, a world war began in that year. So he was able to say, well, there you go, I was right all along, even though what he predicted was not the start of a world war, but the end of the world. He predicted Armageddon to come, which is not something that Watchtower will be happy to admit today.
So a follow-up question from me would be, when you have had this discussion with a believing Jehovah's Witness, how do they square that circle?
Oh, they'll say I'm lying. They just
Simple as that.
I have to be lying, or I have to be mistaken, or I have to be exaggerating. When you're a Jehovah's Witness, take your pick of ways to get out of that conversation, but you really just have to hold them to the evidence and say, well, have you actually looked in studies in the scriptures? And thankfully, due to the generosity of my readers, I have a complete set of studies in the scriptures. And the interesting thing is, if you check a copy of studies in the scriptures from before 1914, it's making all of these claims saying, well, Armageddon will be coming and the world will end and we'll switch to the new system after 1914. And then in 1915, there was a watchtower released saying, we're making a few changes. And all of the changes were related to the year 1914, so that all copies of studies in the scriptures that were printed after 1914 have all changed their predictions and made them more vague. So that's Watchtower's version of intellectual honesty.
It makes me wonder what it was like for followers then when they actually made those changes, because I remember listening to a woman speaking about it was a Catholic woman talking about when the church changed their policies on limbo, and she was saying that they don't get the right to say that to her when she's been dealing with what she thought was the reality of her child that died being in limbo, and then they just said, oh no, it's not in limbo. If it was innocent, it's in heaven. Yeah. And she was like, they don't get to tell me that I've spent 30 years, worrying about what's happened to my child.
Yeah, it causes trauma, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, do you think they managed to lose a lot of followers and then gradually regain them once people forgot about it?
Well, it was a completely different religion back then. It was just a kind of a fairly small, insignificant Christian denomination that had one or two branches in places like London and Australia and what have you, but it was mostly just a North American sect. And after 1914, and especially during the leadership battle in 1917 when Rutherford took over, there were a lot of people that left. And actually, Rutherford was himself responsible for lots of people leaving. It was only towards the end of Rutherford's presidency, and he died in 1942, and then Knorr took over, and it was really Knorr who built Jehovah's Witnesses into the organisation we think of now as being this huge kind of world-encompassing organisation with branches everywhere. Knorr was really the one who was responsible for that. But if it had been left to continue the way Russell and Rutherford were running things, I think it would still be a relatively inconsequential crackpot cult, mostly focused in North America.
It's kind of there's a bit of an overlap here with Mormonism, and I think it would be remiss of me to have a former fully fledged Jehovah's Witness on the show without me just asking simple things for people that haven't been able, for people that haven't really listened to Jehovah's Witnesses speak before. What are the similarities between Mormonism and Jehovah's Witnesses? Because one of the main questions I get a lot is, are they Jehovah's Witnesses or are they Mormons? And I have to sort of parse out the difference.
Well, doctrinally, the differences are absolutely immense.
Yeah.
But organisationally, they're very, very similar. So I would, for example, I would recommend watching a Channel 4 documentary called Meet the Mormons. I think you can watch it on Channel 4's website, or if you're in America, you can look it up on YouTube. Channel 4 has this weird copyright thing where it won't let people in the UK watch its programs on YouTube.
Yeah, I just watched the UK version of the video that you released about the fake awards.
Oh, it's crazy! Don't get me started. But anyway, to get back to your question, when you watch Meet the Mormons, you're really struck with the similarities organisationally. So they have the same kind of set up with young missionaries and kind of pioneers and elders and worldwide preaching and training programs and all of that sort of thing is very, very similar. But where they differ is doctrinally, because Mormonism is based on the idea that there is in fact a third Bible. So normally there's two Bibles, there's the Old Testament and the New Testament, but Mormons believe that there was actually a third testament that was handed to Joseph Smith. I think in 1844, which is ironically 1844 was when Joseph Smith died, and it was 1844 that there was also the Great Disappointment, which eventually kind of cascaded into Jehovah's Witnesses. So there's actually a lot of similarities in that way. But Mormons believe basically that Jesus took a holiday in South and North America while he was on the earth to visit lost tribes of Jews who previously had sailed across the Atlantic to establish colonies in the Americas. It's an incredibly crackpot set of teachings that you really have to have drummed into you from when you're a fetus.
Yeah, wasn't the Garden of Eden supposed to be in Jackson County, Missouri?
Jackson County, Missouri. Yeah, there's the secret underwear. There's the baptizing dead people. You know, I think. I mean, there's obviously the Book of Mormon musical, and in some ways, I'm jealous that there isn't a Jehovah's Witness musical. But in other ways, I don't think that there could be a Jehovah's Witness musical in the same way, because there's just so many more funny things about Mormon doctrine. I mean, Jehovah's Witness doctrine, there are one or two weird things, but it's mostly just depressing stuff. Whereas with Mormons, you can have a little bit of a laugh at how just completely bonkers their ideas are.
yeah. I suppose Jehovah's Witnesses is just a sort of a variation, a denomination of Christianity as far as the rest of the world's concerned.
It's just 1984 in religion form, Jehovah's Witnesses, and that's not really funny, is it? But with Mormonism, it's genuine crackpot teachings. So
you get to listen to them talk about how they'll be able to have their own planet when they die. And everything.
You name it. It's just outrageous.
The other thing that I would have to ask you, if anybody's listening and hasn't listened to former Jehovah's Witnesses, is the blood issue. This is the second question that always comes up. In fact, no, the blood issue probably comes up first before the Mormon problem. But I always get asked, what's the deal with them not receiving blood? So, in your words, what is the deal, and what do you think about it?
Well, it stems back only as far as 1945. I mean, lots of Jehovah's Witnesses will assume that it goes all the way back to the beginning, but basically, at some point in 1945, senior Watchtower officials got together around a table and thought, we really need some kind of teaching that will just make us awkwardly stand out from everyone else. Why don't we refuse blood transfusions? I can't guarantee that that's how the conversation went, but I can't see it going much differently than that. And so from 1945 onwards, you weren't allowed to have a blood transfusion. For a brief period in the 60s, you weren't even allowed to have an organ transplant. And they referred to that as cannibalism. But they did a U-turn on that so that you were allowed an organ transplant. And suddenly organ transplants became a matter of conscience. Now, with blood transfusions, in recent years, they changed the teaching so that you could have fractions. So you are allowed to have someone else's donated blood so long as it's been filtered into its various main components. And that is now a matter of conscience. But obviously, in order for you to receive those fractions, somebody somewhere has to give blood. And it won't be a Jehovah's Witness. So there's just so many things that don't make sense. And the funny thing is that even from a biblical perspective, if you try and base it all on the Bible, you're also on dodgy ground, because Jesus frequently referred to rabbinic principles whereby life was the most important thing, and it didn't matter what laws you were trying to apply so long as you were trying to save life. And he gave the example of the bull falling into a pit on the Sabbath. Well, you wouldn't uphold the Sabbath and let your bull die in a pit. You'd do the work and you get it out. And so the same principles could be applied and are applied, in fact, by the majority of monotheistic religions. But Jehovah's Witnesses feel that they are the ones who have to stand out, and they're quite willing to not only die themselves, but let their kids who aren't Jehovah's Witnesses die as a result of observing this teaching.
I've never really been able to see past the blood issue. It's always amazed me, no matter how many times I've heard or read anything about it. But even on the Jehovah's Witnesses' own website, their only justification are some of the scriptures, like you just said, saying that Jehovah explains how important the blood is, because it said that the blood is the life, or the blood gives life, or something like that. But we know that it's one of the components of life. We could say that the brain is life, the heart is life, the lungs is life. But they're allowed to do transplantation. And I've seen a little diagram online of when they allowed when they allowed transplants and when they didn't, and when blood was okay or when it was okay up until, and also that what you said about separating blood into its main components. So we got like red cells, white cells, platelets, and plasma. So really, you could have a pint of all four, which would equate to blood.
Mix it together in a cocktail. What's the difference? So it's crazy.
I just think it's such an important thing, because it could genuinely be the difference between life and death, and has been. So if you're faced with something like that, imagine if you were still in the faith now, and your little girl needed a blood transplant, you'd need a really good reason to not give her the blood transplant if the medical profession were telling you that she needed one. And I don't think they're good enough reasons. I still don't understand that even in an indoctrinated worldview, I still can't see how that has ever made sense to a single human being.
Yeah, I think that there is a lot of conflict though, because obviously you mentioned my website jwsurvey.org. Little plug there. We have a survey where we directly ask, and bear in mind that there are active witnesses taking our survey too, and we directly ask them, would you allow your child to die for want of a blood transfusion? And it's quite astonishing. It's astonishing that there are still Jehovah's Witnesses who say yes. But the funny thing is that even with active witnesses, they're in the minority. So it seems to be that most witnesses would turn down blood if it was for themselves. But more witnesses than Watchtower would care to admit, if push came to shove and they were in a situation where they faced letting their child die, I think they would just go through with it. I honestly do. But the main thing is that's not down to Watchtower, that's down to their own humanity. So they are having to allow their humanity to override an extremely inhumane policy that literally kills people. So that's, we were talking before about cults, and I think Watchtower is definitely up there. I think the worst cult is ISIS and what have you, but Watchtower is definitely one of the damaging cults, because it actually does kill people when it's followed through to its end game.
Just going back to jwsurvey.org, another little plug there. I'm presuming that when you get either emails or surveys conducted by people who are actually serving Jehovah's Witnesses, I presume that some of those people are serving as Jehovah's Witnesses, and their family and friends presume that they are fully fledged believers, but they're actually closeted atheists. Is that right?
Well, the atheist question is that changes really depending on whether they've left or not. I would say that the majority of not the majority, a narrow majority of ex-Jehovah's Witnesses are in some form atheists. They're either atheists or agnostics, or just not, or none of the above. A narrow majority would fit that description. But when it comes to actual believing Jehovah's Witnesses, there is a small percentage of atheists, but they're very much in the minority. I think most people who are going to the meetings, we said before, there's a huge spectrum of belief and unbelief, and I think that the thing with cult indoctrination is that the brain is so complex that you can have it so partitioned that part of your brain is thinking this is absolute utter nonsense, and actually I don't mind going on apostate websites, and then another small part of your brain is thinking, but I better stay in just in case, So cults really do create that kind of turmoil, and obviously we call it cognitive dissonance. But I think cognitive dissonance takes radically different forms in different people. So, no two people's experiences are the same in that way.
I find that after having had a conversation with my mum about the fact that all of her children now are non-Jehovah's Witnesses. Not necessarily, I've never told her that I'm an atheist or anything like that, and neither of her other children. But I've had a conversation with her about the fact that I was doing it as like a joke, like I was trying to tease her, but she got a bit upset about it. And my basic point was, your kids aren't going to be in they're not going to be in the paradise on earth, so you and my dad are just going to sort of step over our dead bodies into the promised land, and you're just going to be enjoying yourself for the rest of time. But because it says in the Bible about how there'll be no sorrow, nor hurt, nor pain anymore, and all that kind of stuff, the former things have passed away, which is something that my mum used to say a lot. So my point was, not only is she going to step over our dead bodies into the new system, but she's not going to be bothered about it either. And I was like, what kind of a mum are you that you're not going to give a toss about your kids that are dead? And she got really upset about it. But I was doing it like I was trying to tease her. But I just thought it's a weird, like, her cognitive dissonance will be in varying forms, but she honestly believes that she's going to go and live forever in a paradise on earth, and she also believes that she will not be upset about the fact that the rest of her family, other than her husband, is all dead.
Yeah, that's one of the great ironies, is that witnesses are told, "Oh, the former things will not be called to mind," and every conceivable wish that you could have would be cared for. And that can only mean that she'll just completely forget about you. Or in the case of my dad, he'll completely forget about me. Well, I would argue that who we are in our very being is defined by who our loved ones are and how we interact with them. So if you're going to strip away all memory of me from my dad, he's no longer my dad. He's no longer the same person. So for your mum to reach a stage at some point in the future where she could no longer give a toss about you means that she is no longer the same woman. So who is she? What's the whole point of her having any favourable living conditions in a paradise if she's no longer the same person?
Yeah, exactly. I also asked her, which gave me the God glaze over in her eyes. I said to her, supposing my dad died and you remarried within the system of things, when you go into the new system and people are regenerated, presumably they're regenerated in it.
Sorry, are we slipping into Doctor Who now?
I think so. Yeah, this has to be a story arc of Doctor Who, surely. Where if my dad died and she remarried, and then that guy died as well, maybe she remarries again. So she had 3 husbands. She moves into the new system. They were, good Jehovah's Witnesses who were resurrected was the word I was looking for.
Yeah.
They're resurrected, presumably into a decent body, so they'll probably want themselves, but maybe 21, 25, something like that, where they were in good condition. So now, does she rewind? I'm just looking for the detail. Does she rewind?
Right, yeah.
And does she end up being 25?
Yeah. Does
she end up with 3 husbands? Because if you change their memories, then they're no longer the same person, but they have been unaware of the passage of time, like the Bible says. So when she's faced with the 3 husbands, what happens then?
Well, I actually think this is a subject that actually causes a lot of trauma for Jehovah's Witnesses, because obviously my dad is in a similar situation because his wife, my mother, is no longer here. She's dead, and so my dad is, whether he will admit it or not, he's extremely conflicted over what's going to be the case when the new system comes, because when Jesus was apparently asked this question, he said, well, the dead don't marry and aren't given in marriage because they're like angels. Now, what he said makes a whole lot of sense if people go to heaven when they die, but it doesn't make a lot of sense in a Paradise Earth context. And Watchtower has tried all sorts of ways of squaring the circles. I forget what its current understanding is, but until recently, it's I think actually the way of dealing with it now is just basically for them to shrug their shoulders and say, we don't know how God's going to solve the problem, but we just know that whatever solution he comes up with will be brilliant. And that's essentially how they dodge the issue entirely, which doesn't really satisfy people in your mum's situation or in my dad's situation. It's just it's just fobbing off the question. So that's one of the fortunately you and I kind of don't have to square the circle. We can just realize it's just all a load of nonsense to begin with. But when you are a believing witness, this is an issue of serious trauma. And we were talking before about purgatory and how that affects Catholics, to suddenly be told, oh, by the way, was it purgatory?
Limbo.
Sorry, limbo. To suddenly be told, oh, by the way, limbo doesn't exist, when it's given them so much comfort for so long. It's extremely cruel, but it all makes sense once you realise it's all man-made to begin with.
That's I was just about. I was trying to keep a thought while I was listening to you, and it just fell out of my head as I was about to say it.
Was it to do with Doctor Who?
It wasn't. I haven't seen enough Doctor Who for my life. I haven't seen any of the recent stuff.
And I am actually a science fiction fan as well, but for some reason I just can't get into Doctor Who. I've never been able to dig it.
I think my sister's 11 years older than I am, so she was too scared of Doctor Who when I was young. When she was allowed to watch it, she wouldn't allow us to watch it. So I think I just missed a whole gap there. I don't have the nostalgia that goes with it.
No, I'm Star Wars and Star Trek myself. Don't have much time for anything else.
Yes. Have you seen the new Star Wars? Yeah.
Oh yeah. I think 4 times now I've watched it.
Have you?
Yeah.
I saw it twice at the cinema.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Anyway, right. Let's just get back to Jehovah's
Back
Witness
to
stuff.
Jehovah's Witnesses.
What was the thing there? I just want to direct listeners to the documentary that you did about regarding Jehovah's Witnesses and child abuse. While we're making the sort of we were talking just then, weren't we, about limbo and about Jehovah's Witnesses' view on things. A lot of religions kind of overlap, and I think the child abuse scandal that's sort of that's coming to light slowly but surely. There's a lot of similarities between what's happening with the JW organisation as well as the Catholic child rape scandal. Let's call it what it is.
Yeah.
I hate the word sex scandal. I keep seeing it written down. The Catholic sex scandal. It's not a sex scandal.
It's child rape. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So let's just talk about the documentary, because I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Bravo, well done.
Thank you.
And it kind of highlighted or it showed me what I had already been thinking and already suspecting based on things I'd seen and read. But it's just nice to see it like you did it, where it's kind of formulating all the compartmental sort of areas of your brain. It kind of puts all those things in line, and it would be nice to see what Jehovah's Witnesses' reactions were to that.
Yeah.
Should they watch it or feel like they were able to watch it?
I think there will be Jehovah's Witnesses watching it. It's already on, I think, 22,000 views, and you're not telling me that's all ex-JWs. So I think there will be JWs that have watched it. But really, the motivation behind making it was the fact that I've obviously been running JW Survey now, well, let me think, 5 years. This year, it'll be 5 years that I've been running JW Survey, and so many articles have been devoted to covering the ongoing relentless surge of child molestation cases that are coming out of Watchtower. And it just occurred to me that we have all of these kind of individual accounts and individual stories and individual court cases, but there wasn't, at least to my knowledge, on YouTube, a single video that brought them all together and explained kind of the story from kind of start to finish. And I wanted to do something that kind of took the viewer through. Well, you know, in the beginning, there was the Dateline and Panorama programs in 2002. And then we had the Candace Conti lawsuit in 2012, and just take people through it kind of step by step. I'd also show them what the response of the governing body has been. And I thought, if I was a Jehovah's Witness, that's the sort of video I'd want to watch. But the problem I had was that although I'm kind of slowly getting towards being a full-time activist, I still have my job, I still have my family, and it's difficult to set aside the time to do it. And I needed, in the end, 3 weeks to work on it, from when I first started writing the script through to the final edits. And fortunately, one of my readers, one of my viewers, said, well, I'll pay you to do it. And he gave me some money, like a wage almost, so that I could devote that 3 weeks to making the video. And I'm really grateful to him for doing that, because although it's something that I did care passionately about, at the same time, when you've got a family and you've got a little daughter and you've got work to go to, something's got to give. So it was really good that I was given that opportunity to just treat it like work and do it on like a 9-to-5 basis. And I think in the final weeks, when I was kind of bringing it to its conclusion, I was staying up until like 2 a.m. to get it over the line. But I think the end product is worth it, and people seem to really enjoy it. So,
yeah, and you can see that it's although the subject matter is very difficult to deal with, you can tell it's also a labour of love, because even though the subject matter is difficult, exposing this for what it is could in the future actually protect children, and I think that really matters.
Yeah.
I think that's really important to think about.
Well, that's one of the main things that motivates me actually with my activism in general is, I always get a kick out of people emailing me or messaging me and saying, "Oh, well, your stuff has helped me to wake up." I do get a kick out of that. But the real kind of moments that make me elated or fill me with joy are when someone says, "You've woken me up, and I've got kids." Because then I think, well, they if they're kids, they won't have to deal with any of this. You know, it will just be a very, very faint blip in their memory, and they'll have a life completely free of any knowledge of this terrible cult. And of course, people who don't have kids who wake up, maybe they'll go on to have kids, and it's that idea of the next generation, of there being people who aren't even born yet, who will not be born as Jehovah's Witnesses. That's what really gives me a genuine thrill with activism work.
Yeah, good. So obviously, I would encourage everybody to watch the documentary, and that it's a good, maybe it's like an hour and a half. Is it an hour and a half?
Yes, it's 90 minutes. Yeah.
Just in summary, could you just sort of explain what the difficulty is, as far as obviously there's difficulties with the rape of children, of course, but what is the difficulty as far as the Watchtower organisation is concerned and their policies? What is that?
The main difficulty. Sorry, I'm just making sure it's still recording. The main difficulty, I actually mentioned 4 problems in my video. The main difficulty is the 2-witness rule. So Watchtower has this rule whereby if someone commits a sin, there have to be at least 2 people, including the victim, who can attest that it happened. Now, obviously, in cases of child rape, there isn't someone on hand to watch it happen. But even so, when the victim comes forward, elders will still say, well, do you have another witness? And if they don't have another witness and the perpetrator denies it, which they obviously will want to do, then they are actually instructed in their elders manual to leave the matter in Jehovah's hands. So that's the 2-witness rule. I also talk about separation from the world, and how when you're raised as a Jehovah's Witness, you're taught, for example, that it's wrong to take your brother to court. It's wrong to involve the authorities in claims against your brother. And that thinking does play into the way witness parents approach child abuse. And I actually interview someone in my documentary who more or less says that when you're a Jehovah's Witness, it's difficult to take things to that level when you're aware of someone doing something to your child. There's also matters surrounding secrecy, and the fact that Watchtower just hates having anything reflect negatively on it, so it will try and cover things up to the extent possible. And there are letters where it says, if you're investigating something that's also a crime, please make sure you don't let the authorities know about it. I'm racking my brains and trying to think what the 4th thing is. I have like a diagram at the beginning, but there's so many things that are kind of ingrained and inbuilt into Watchtower culture that make, I think the way Angus Stewart phrased it with the Royal Commission, he said it's a perfect storm for child abuse, the way everything's set up. And I would agree with that. Everything is just set up perfectly so that if you are a child molester, it's much easier to perpetrate those sickening crimes.
Not only to perpetrate, but to continue to perpetrate.
Yeah.
Which is the real difficult thing.
Oh, I've remembered the 4th one now. The fourth one is forgiveness. So, so the idea is that if you have molested a child and you're disfellowshipped for it, and then you're reinstated, you should be able to just continue on as though nothing's happened in the minds of. And this isn't just for child abuse, this is for other things as well. So the idea is that true forgiveness means that you can just start off with a blank slate. But Watchtower takes this one step further, and they actually have letters that say it cannot be said in all instances. I'm quoting almost word for word now. It cannot be said in all instances that one who has molested a child cannot have a privilege of service in the future. So you have this situation where people who have even confessed to molesting kids are actually allowed to serve in positions of trust, such as elders and ministerial servants, even though they've confessed to it. And the only thing that Watchtower insists on is that there isn't a reputation, and that that not enough people know about it. And obviously people aren't going to know about it if there are procedures in place to make sure they never know about it.
Just that alone is enough for me. You know, I feel like if I was an adult and I was a Jehovah's Witness, it would take a serious amount of cognitive dissonance for me to allow that to slide and still think that this organisation that is governed by a governing body of old white guys in New York. Oh no, there's a couple of black guys there. I think there's one. That they somehow have the handle on ultimate truth, and my only way to a promised land is through them. When they not only allow this thing to happen, but actually build policies which would rather protect the organisation than children, which is exactly what the Catholic Church has done. In every instance, it has been protect the church first, not the children. And occasionally they've offered some form of apology, but never acceptance. And both organisations could have, as many child safeguarding advocates have said millions of times over, both organisations could make this so much better for children by just simply changing one policy. Yeah. And all they would have to do is go to the authorities. That's it. Yeah. Just go to the authorities.
Well, in my video, I write a letter for Watchtower, and it's only like a short paragraph, and I say this is the letter that Watchtower needs to send to all bodies of elders, and then, you know, you would still have the historic cases, but from this point forward, children would be protected if they just had this letter read out to all bodies of elders. But like you say, for whatever reason, the organisation puts the organisation before children, and I actually think that's one of the most powerful arguments for the governing body being deluded rather than cynical. Because if they were just cynical and they were just interested in perpetrating some kind of scam, they'd want their organisation to be as legitimate and respectable as possible. But because they do believe they have God on their side, and because they believe God really wants them to have this two-witness rule, they're willing to shell out millions in court costs and kind of weather this storm of negative publicity because they believe they're doing what God wants them to do.
Yeah, yeah, it's a sick prospect, isn't it? But you're rest assured, though, your documentary and your activism is going to go a long way to helping people out. So thanks for your efforts.
Thank you.
We've sort of gone past the hour mark now, and with an intro from co-host and signing off and stuff, it's going to get a bit much for the listeners probably. So I'm going to wrap it up pretty soon. Is that okay?
Yeah. Does this mean I don't get to sing?
You don't get to sing, but you could sing in the future. I tweeted you, didn't I? And said I could play the guitar and stuff, so we could.
I'll hold you to that. Yeah.
I still think maybe next Christmas we should try and get as many people, you know, like who are active to sort of do a Twitter. Not Twitter. Sorry.
I do actually have a small band with me in the room, but it's okay. I'll tell them to all kind of go home and come back next time. Guys, it's not right for this episode. So
they've just been waiting behind the curtain for them.
Next week, I'll talk him into it. Okay. Yeah, they'll be fine. They'll be okay.
In my mind's eye, it's like a mariachi band, and they're all just like they've got like a sullen face with large moustaches, and they're all just walking away.
Seriously, can you see what's going on in my house? That is weird.
They're just taking off their massive hats and dusting them off as they walk out the door.
Yeah.
Right. Is there anything that I didn't get to that you wanted to get to? I'm
glad that you mentioned the child abuse video. I think you mentioned briefly about the circuit overseers leaks in the last episode. You talked about that a little bit, and that again is interesting because we're getting these quite high level documents leaked out of Watchtower now. In fact, there's loads of them sitting on my hard drive that I just haven't had a chance to leak out yet. They're not kind of urgent ones. The urgent ones I always try and get out as quickly as possible, but we kind of almost have this luxury now of information coming out of Watchtower from people who are inside and at quite high levels, but they don't agree with what's going on, and they're anxious to get information out to those of us on the outside who are trying to do something about it. So it's quite an exciting time actually to be doing activism, because I think that, well, basically my theory is that Watchtower was designed and built to flourish in the 20th century. And now it's in the 21st century, and it's a completely different ball game with the information age. And I just don't think the information age is a friendly period in which cults can operate. So I think gradually everything is kind of coming undone. And we're now getting a situation where even people in the higher tiers of the organisation are thinking, oh, this isn't right. So it's exciting to see the information being leaked out. And one of my latest videos is about Circuit Overseer guidelines, which touch, as you mentioned, on child abuse. And absolutely. And this is a recent document as well, as recent as 2015. And they don't mention anything at all about reporting to authorities. So.
Yeah, the expression "the internet where religions come to die" comes to mind.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Actually, that brings me to one of the other series that you do on YouTube, which is your thoughts on the JW broadcasting.
Yeah. And
now that we're in the information age, it is a different animal. Like that's why I wanted to speak to you, because your point of view is quite interesting to me, because a lot of the things that I used to do and the things that I used to think and used to believe, it's almost like a bygone era now, because we're talking 98 was the last time I defined myself as a Jehovah's Witness, and the only time I've been into a Kingdom Hall. Actually, it wasn't a Kingdom Hall. It was the where you said Manchester, not arena.
The MEN Arena. Oh, you mean Northern?
Yeah, Northern. Yeah. I went there to watch my dad get baptised, because my dad actually got baptised after.
That's where I was baptised as well.
Was you?
So your dad and me were baptised at the same place.
All right. Well, I went to watch that because it was important to my dad, and I regretted it later, because I could feel the eyes on me, because obviously there was people there that I hadn't seen for years, and I wanted to go because I knew that it meant something to my dad, and I wanted to make sure that we still had a relationship where I was willing to go against what I thought was necessarily right or wrong in order to support him. But that's the last time I ever entered. And when I left, there was no JW website. There was none of these children's animations. Yeah. My young Young People Ask book was an actual book. There was nothing online for me. So what you're doing is it's a completely different world from what I remember.
Well, I'm just as surprised as you are, because I woke up from my indoctrination, I would say in 2010. In fact, I found a letter recently, and I was able to pin it down more precisely. I think it was January 2010 that I first wrote a letter to my wife saying, I can imagine leaving the Witnesses. But prior to that, the organisation that I can actually remember is completely different. It no longer actually exists, because, just one example, if you were to kind of ask me if there was one good thing about being a Jehovah's Witness, I would probably say, well, at least the Theocratic Ministry School gave you some transferable skills and taught you how to be a good speaker and, how to handle yourself in public. There is no longer a Theocratic Ministry School. They just have a Bible reading at the meeting and then a few ministry presentations. So
really,
it really is kind of our experience, your experience, and my experience actually no longer exists. So Jehovah's Witnesses can't have that back even if they wanted to. And we now have this bizarre organisation where the governing body has managed to convince itself that the best way to impress people is to thrust themselves in front of a camera on a regular basis. I can remember the Proclaimers book coming out in 1993. I would have been 13 at the time, and one of the highlights of the Proclaimers book, which is the Watchtower history book, is that it had a page where it showed you the photographs of the governing body, and it was like a big thing because we thought, wow, that's what they look like. We didn't really have any pictures of the governing body all on one page, and that was kind of an event in itself. And from that point forward, actually having a picture of the governing body together was almost unheard of. It was a very, very rare thing. And now you have a situation where the governing body is kind of thrusting itself in our faces. It used to be every month. Now it's every 2 months. I think they're realizing they need to back off a little bit. And they're sending out their helpers to do the shows every other month. But What they really... this is another point I was making before about them being deluded. If they were cynical, they would realise that the best way to secure people's loyalty and people's affection is to stay out of people's faces and to have this myth build up around them, which is what we had before. Because you didn't see them, you respected them more. But now, because we see them so much, we see them warts and all, and we see how pompous and arrogant and stupid they are. And
like the guy with the glasses. I know there's a few with glasses, but the one that's in your child abuse documentary,
Tony Morris.
It might be him. It's the one that it cuts to him, and he says, and he explains about what people have been saying about their policies on child abuse, and he's like, can you imagine that? You know that guy.
That was Stephen Lett, yeah.
Ah, right, yeah. Like, you can see how pompous he was, and also it's quite easy to see how much he was lying. So,
Stephen Lett is like a caricature of himself anyway, because he has this kind of rubbery face and these very exaggerated facial expressions. So. But again, this is all stuff that would be best kept behind the curtain. But with JW Broadcasting, I mean, it's like that scene in Wizard of Oz where the dog runs off and starts tugging at the curtain, and then you see this floundering old man pulling at levers, and you realise that's the Wizard of Oz. It's like that, I think. It's increasingly becoming like that for Jehovah's Witnesses when they watch these JW Broadcasting episodes, because although it's very, very potent propaganda and there's stuff in there that I really do believe will affect witnesses and make them feel the need to be loyal, you also have this very ugly side to the governing body members where you can see that they're just going through the motions, and they're very kind of... it's very feigned and contrived and sickly and cheesy. And honestly, with some of these episodes, I actually feel, well, I don't really need to say anything. I can just show them the clip. And it's getting to the stage now where I try and keep my comments as short as possible, because it's better often to just let the material speak for itself. But I do think that there needs to be something on YouTube just so that witnesses are able to watch these JW Broadcasting episodes and have some kind of reply, some kind of objective criticism of it.
Yeah, and if somebody's saying what they might be thinking but repressing, it might be, you might become like their sort of their inner voice that's actually.
I get that. I get that a lot as well. I get people saying, "I was thinking something as I was watching it, and then you came on and said exactly what I was thinking." So there's this. It's a shared experience, isn't it, when we're ex-witnesses, and we will often react to things the same way. Yeah.
Right, well, congrats. Congrats on the child abuse documentary. That's brilliant. So's the YouTube channel, and I would encourage everybody to go and have a little look, have a watch the videos. I might actually link. This will be on iTunes and Stitcher. Yeah. But I'll also release it as a YouTube video as well. So I'll put the links below. I'll link a few of your videos that we've talked about.
Well, if I'd have known it would be a video, I would have put a shirt on. You should have told me.
No, it'll be audio only.
Oh, good.
There isn't a video feed, despite me knowing exactly what your band looked like. So former Jehovah's Witnesses do think alike.
Yeah, exactly.
Spooky. Right, okay, well, thanks very much for appearing on the show, the very first ever guest.
It's been an absolute pleasure and an honour, and well done with this podcast, and I look forward to seeing what you do with it.
Thanks. I'd love to have you back again at some point. I've got a list of guests I'm going to try and roll through, but like now we've had like sort of a bit of a general chat. I'd like to speak to you just with maybe a few very specific things in mind, as opposed to sort of going around the houses. Is that okay?
Sure thing.
Excellent. Right. Well, thanks very much for appearing. We'll see you soon.
Okay. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Yes. I got to tell you, I felt quite vomitous listening to that. Watching him with his no top on, no, I'm joking. Listening to that, it made me feel quite sick.
Yes. What stood out for you? Just
because I haven't seen the video, the documentary he's done. I haven't seen that. And when you were talking about that, I was like, oh, it's the Catholic Church all over again. And I know it is, but it's a lot quieter than the Catholic Church, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, and that, it causes a problem for me. I don't like it.
Yeah, remember when we watched the Deliverers from Evil documentary?
I'll never forget it. I felt a bit like that. It's not on the same scale because you're not as involved, obviously, listening to it and you're not seeing it, which is why I want to watch the documentary, but that makes me sick. The thought of that documentary still makes me vomit.
It makes you wonder how many more religious institutes are doing this similar kind of thing. And I know in this country we've had the whole thing about the BBC, haven't we, with their sort of protection of some of the presenters that have ended up, after Jimmy Savile died and things like that. Yeah. Now it just goes to show that, like, with power should come some responsibility, but also with a little bit of power and notoriety means that you have a certain level of protection as well. And if you also think that God's on your side and every sin is equal, from like
stealing cheese, from
stealing to homosexuality to raping children, all these things are forgivable. Like Lloyd said in the interview, he says, like, one of the problems is the whole act of forgiveness. Like, to think that somebody could be part of that Jehovah's Witness organisation and have raped a child and have admitted to having raped a child, and it not necessarily being the case that he would not be reinstated into the position of power. It's almost like being sort of chosen by Jehovah, isn't it, as far as a young child is concerned? And
I think I like the fact that he'd said a couple of times the word cult, because it just is, and I think what he was getting at as well is that they are having to move with the times because their cult needs to, and we're cutting down on this because if we tell them everything, they're not going to believe it. And that's what I don't know as much as you guys do because I've never been involved in it, but as an outsider looking in and listening to you guys talk, it's so fascinating because everything you're saying is from where you were and you both fell out with it, where they're going now. They're trying to flatter people with stars and spangly glitter and bright lights, and this is what we, and that is a big part of religion, isn't it? That's what religious people do. They try and get you when you're low, which is part of his story. Which is part of how your family ended up in the Jehovah's Witnesses. They got a member of your family when they were at a low point in their lives, and then kind of the rest of you got involved. But then because you're more open-minded, and eventually you go, it's interesting to hear. It's really, really interesting to hear these stories.
I always think when I hear about the policies of any organisation that's religious, when I hear about their policies changing, like as new light is like shone on their leaders, or there's like a new revelation or whatever. Every time I see a policy change, I always look at it and think to myself, isn't it weird that all these followers are seeing that there's slight problems with the faith, and then the hierarchy realise that these problems are becoming untenable, so that they need to then change them. And if you could introduce a Jehovah's Witness from now to introduce them to a Jehovah's Witness 40, 50 years ago, they would be unrecognisable as followers of that religion, and yet they can't see that might be a problem. And it's the same. Just recently, I'd like to go into detail on this, but this will be a full podcast. But very recently, the Pope has just talked about families and whether or not divorced Catholics will be able to take Holy Communion, and the gays are just they're valued members. But they're just not allowed the same rights as everybody else.
Absolutely.
And it, like what he has said, like people are like yes, the Pope and everybody, they're really listening to the things that we want changed.
They're just changing the rules that are meant to be set out.
Yeah, it's like so if enough people just go, you know what, God's plan's pretty shit. Can we change God's plan, please?
We need to move with the times. Come on, everybody. You can all have sex with each other before marriage, after marriage, with each other in marriage. Just go for it, guys. Go for it.
Just come to the church, goddammit.
We need the numbers, man.
But we in the interview we spoke about limbo, didn't we? About how they changed the teachings on limbo, and now they're slowly changing. They don't just say, they won't come out and just go, you know what, homosexuals, just join. You everybody who's been excommunicated in the past, or if you've been divorced, you can take Holy Communion from now on. They don't just go out and just say that. What they do is they start talking about like the fact that they're going to have a meeting and they're going to have a dialogue and all this kind of shit.
Absolutely.
Because they can't just come out and say it, because most Catholics will go, what? And one of the other things that really bugged me, again, I want to go into detail, but I won't, the Pope mentioning that the countries should sort of, each country has its own kind of culture, and what he has sent out to all those leaders, cardinals, bishops, and stuff. The laws and the policies that they have should be interpreted through the culture.
Yes.
Because
different country.
so,
Absolutely, because they're all different and they're all more extreme.
Which is crazy, because that kind of means if you're a progressive society and you say, no thanks, we're going to use contraception, eventually they'll go, yeah, well, maybe you can, but we're not going to say that you definitely can. But
you just interpret it how you like for your congregation.
Because they just want the numbers.
That's right. And they know. I think all of these things, everything that you guys talked about, and everything that the Pope is saying, it's panicking. It's firefighting. Shit, we're losing it. We need to do something quick. It's okay to get divorced. Yay! Like what are the masses? Right? Okay, let's do that. Oh, it's okay to be gay, kind of, but not really. But can't.
Yeah.
And in a few more years, it's okay to. And they're just trying. They're trying to roll with the times, but it's completely wiping out the history and the point of the religion, but they don't seem to see that yet.
Like when
unfortunately, the worrying thing for me is that Catholics go, "Oh, right, Pope said it's fine."
Yeah.
Oh, the Pope said it's fine. We can do that now.
Yeah, we can do that now. It's fine.
That is absolutely outrageous that a guy that just got voted in a couple of years ago, we just believe him now. That's fine.
That was like the guy that you were talking about, the Mormon that you were talking about, where like he'd spent a significant proportion of his life not being able to eat chocolate.
That's right.
And then suddenly he's just like,
like,
what? We can have chocolate?
He has chocolate under the bed. He eats
mini eggs.
All right, no, that's just me. Who doesn't love a good mini egg? But he is absolutely gorgeous on it. Like I've never seen. It's breakfast, dinner, and tea. It's a constant.
We can have chocolate now.
We can have chocolate now.
Wow. So if you can take somebody from now and then rewind time, they could meet somebody from 40, 50 years ago, it would be unrecognisable. And likewise, we could probably grab a Jehovah's Witness.
JFK. I know that's not relevant to this, but I just love it.
It's not.
Move on.
Maybe we'll do that in the outtakes.
Catholic, does that help?
We'll wait that for the specific for the Catholicism one. But if you took a Jehovah's Witness from right now and then we'll put them in the future, they would probably meet Jehovah's Witnesses that could take blood, which is something that me and Lloyd talked about as well, about whether or not you were allowed to have transplants. But up until I think it was 1945, I think maybe you were allowed to have blood transfusions, and then suddenly you weren't. But what you can have, believe it or not, I don't know if you actually heard this part of the interview, but what you can have.
I heard it all. What are you talking about?
No, I mean it depends on how much attention you were paying to it all the way through, right?
You're very rude.
or rather, should I say, to remind the audience?
Okay, good. Well done. Nice.
The blood transfusions that you're not allowed to have. Okay. But as a you can take this on board as far as your conscience will let you, as far as the Watchtower Trek Society will allow you to. If you can find it within your conscience to accept these things, what you can have is one of the constituents of blood. So either red blood cells or white blood cells or plasma or platelets, right? But they have to be these things have to be taken from people who have given blood, which won't be Jehovah's Witnesses. But if they were to have a pint of all four of those, it would equate to blood. Like they say, the devil's in the detail because God definitely isn't.
Gosh.
What a guy.
Goodness gracious, great balls of fire. I gotta say, just to wrap this up, because this podcast is going to be 4 hours long, so we apologise.
Sorry.
You should be, you talk a lot. I thought he was really interesting. I really enjoyed listening to him.
He was. We love Lloyd.
Lloyd. He seemed like Lloyd. He seems like a real good guy. He knew what he was talking about more than anything. He was just so passionate. I enjoyed listening to him.
He sounds like the kind of guy that we would not like to shun.
He seems smart.
He does, yes, and
I love him. He seems smart.
He's agreed to come back for a future show.
I think I should be on with him. Oh darn! Yes, let's do that. You'd enjoy
we could.
that.
Yeah, we could.
Okay, let's do that.
You just need to be with me on my Skype. That's all.
I can do that.
Let's do it.
Multi-Skype. Is that like a three-way? Moving on.
Audio three-way.
I'll see you there, Lloyd.
and when we get Jen August back on the podcast, Jen August.
Do we have to do that in August?
So when we get Jen August on the podcast, the writer,
January.
That's bad. I know we're not even drinking wine.
not. We
Feels weird doing
usually
a podcast. Feels weird doing a sober podcast. Okay, so when Jen August is on the podcast, the writer of the book that's based on her life, Chris Minsky, will. I'm hoping he's going to be able to come on at the same time.
Yep.
So then, if you are as well, then it'll be a 4-way. Like we're just going to keep increasing it until it's just a whole congregation.
Like a gangbang.
Ooh.
On a Sunday.
iTunes explicit. Okay, so thanks, Lloyd.
Thank you, Lloyd. That was fantastic.
We'll see him.
Wonderful. I enjoyed listening to you. And not you, Mr. Watchtower.
What a guy.
Isn't he probably pretty? What a guy.
Probably pretty. Okay, so join us next month for episode 3.
Love you a long time. Otherwise.
There has been an awakening. Have you felt it?